Nicholas Winton kept one secret for 49 years. He never told his wife. He never told his children. He never told a single friend at the office. He went to work. He came home. He grew old in a quiet town west of London. And then, one afternoon in 1988, his wife climbed the narrow stairs into the attic to clear out some old boxes. In the corner, under the dust, she found a battered case. Inside it was a scrapbook. She opened it, and she found herself looking at the faces of children. Small, black and white photographs, dozens to a page. Names typed beside them, birth dates, addresses in a city she had never lived in, and letters. Letters written by hand, by parents, in a language she could not read. She sat down on the floor of her own attic and turned the pages, one after another. There were 669 children in that book. Every one of them had grown up by then, with a job, a home, a family of their own, and every one of them was alive because of the quiet man she had been married to for 40 years. He had never mentioned it, not once, not in 40 years of breakfasts, not in 40 years of Christmases. Tonight, we're going to tell you what Nicholas Winton did in the 9 months before the Second World War. And then we're going to tell you the stranger part of the story, why he spent the next half-century saying absolutely nothing about it. December 1938, London. Nicholas Winton is 29 years old, a stockbroker, suits, ledgers, the London Stock Exchange. He was born Nicholas Wertheim. His parents were German Jews who had come to England, changed the family name, and raised their son in the Anglican Church. In England in those years, that was simply what families did. Hold on to that detail. It will matter later. It is a few days before Christmas, and he is packing for a skiing holiday in Switzerland when the telephone rings. It is a friend, Martin Blake, calling from Prague, where he is working with a British committee trying to help refugees. The message is short: cancel the holiday. Come to Prague, and one line Winton would remember for the rest of his life: don't bother bringing your skis. To understand why that call mattered, you have to know what had happened in Europe that autumn. 2 months earlier, at Munich, Britain and France had agreed to hand a large piece of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. In London, the newspapers called it peace. In Prague, they knew exactly what it was. It was the first bite. Then, in November, came the night of broken glass across Germany and Austria. Synagogues burning, shop windows smashed, thousands of men arrested, and the trains full of refugees began arriving in Prague. Now consider who Nicholas Winton actually was at this moment. Not a diplomat, not a soldier. He held no office, no rank, no authority of any kind. He was a young man with 3 weeks of leave from a stockbroking firm. He canceled the ski trip. He packed a suitcase instead, and he got on a train heading east, into a country everyone in Europe knew was about to disappear. He arrived in Prague in the last days of December, and his friend took him out to the camps. They were on the edges of the city and out in the frozen countryside. Families who had fled the border regions, living in huts and tents through a Central European winter. Wet blankets, mud, children with no shoes that fit. 6 months earlier, these people had owned houses and shops and farms. Now they were queuing for soup in the snow. And Winton asked the question almost nobody was asking. Not how terrible is this, but who is getting these people out? The answer was almost nobody. By the winter of 1938, the doors of the world were closing. Country after country had tightened its rules. For a Jewish family in Czechoslovakia, there was, in practice, nowhere to go. But there was one narrow gap in the wall. Britain would accept unaccompanied children. Not families, not parents, just the children, alone, on 2 conditions we will come to shortly. Children were already being moved out of Germany and Austria. For Czechoslovakia, nobody had set anything up, so a 29-year-old stockbroker on holiday set one up himself. He took a room in a hotel in the center of Prague, put a table in it, and let it be known that there was an Englishman taking names. By the next morning, there was a queue in the corridor. Think about what those parents were doing in that line. They were waiting to hand a photograph of their child to a foreigner they had never met, who had no government behind him and no guarantee of anything at all. They were asking him to take their son, their daughter, and put them on a train to a country they had never seen, to live with strangers whose names they would never learn. And if it worked, if everything went perfectly, the reward was this: they would not see their child again for a very long time, perhaps never. Every parent in that corridor understood the arithmetic. They queued anyway. Winton wrote the names in a notebook. He had 3 weeks of leave. He was going to need considerably more than that. He went back to London in January, and here the story becomes something other than a rescue. It becomes paperwork, because Britain's 2 conditions were not small ones. Condition 1, every single child needed a foster family already waiting in Britain, not a plan for a family, a real family, with a real address, who had already said yes. Condition 2, for every child, somebody had to deposit £50 with the government to cover the child's eventual journey home again. £50 in 1939 was more than many working families earned in 3 months. And Winton was not being asked for it once. He was being asked for it hundreds of times over. So this is how he lived that spring. By day, he worked at the stock exchange because he still had a job and still had to keep it. In the evenings and late into the night, he ran a rescue operation out of his own home. His mother worked beside him. A small handful of volunteers helped. He placed advertisements in newspapers. He wrote to churches and synagogues and town halls. He stood up in front of rooms of strangers, and he carried the photographs. That was the part that worked. Not the arguments, not the statistics, the photographs. He would show a British family a small card with a child's face on it, and a name and a date of birth, and he would let the face do the asking. Those cards are the pages of the scrapbook his wife would find in the attic half a century later. He also wrote to governments around the world, asking them to take some of these children. He wrote to the Americans. He wrote to almost anyone who might listen. Almost every answer came back the same: no. Sweden agreed to take some. Britain agreed on its 2 conditions. That was the entire list, which meant that whatever was going to be done for the children of Czechoslovakia would be done from a dining table in North London by a man making it up as he went along. He had the families, he was raising the money, and then the permits stopped arriving. Every child needed an entry document from the Home Office. Without the paper, no child boarded a train, and the papers were coming through slowly, sometimes not at all. Winton later described going in to plead for them and being told, in the calm and pleasant tone of a man with all the time in the world, "Why rush, old boy? Nothing will happen in Europe." It was the spring of 1939, so Nicholas Winton, stockbroker, respectable citizen, member of the London Stock Exchange, made a decision that could have ended with him in a courtroom. When the permits did not arrive in time, he and his colleagues forged them. He said so himself, plainly, decades later. There was no drama in the way he said it. A child could travel with a real permit, or with one that looked exactly like a real permit. Only one of those 2 was actually available, so they made the papers, and then the ground shifted underneath all of them. On the 15th of March, 1939, German troops marched into Prague. Czechoslovakia was gone. What had been a race against a deadline became something else entirely. Now every train carrying those children would travel out of an occupied capital across Germany itself, with paperwork that was not always genuine, past officials who could stop all of it with a single word. Winton was in London by then, at his desk, on the telephone, filling out forms. The people carrying the real risk were the ones who stayed behind in Prague to run it on the ground. Doreen Warner, Trevor Chadwick, Bill Barazetti, names that almost nobody knows. For the rest of his life, Winton would insist on saying their names before he said his own. The first group of children left Prague on the 14th of March, 1939. That is one day before the tanks arrived. One day. If you go to Prague today and walk into the main railway station, you can stand on the platform where it happened. Between that spring and the end of the summer, 8 transports left this station carrying children out of the country. Picture what one of those mornings actually looked like. A child, sometimes as young as 3 or 4, standing on the platform with a numbered tag hung around their neck so somebody at the other end would know who they were. One small suitcase, sometimes a single toy, whatever a mother could fit inside and still close the lid. The parents had been told not to cry, not out of cruelty, but because a scene on a platform draws attention, and attention was the one thing this operation could not survive. So there are children in those photographs waving cheerfully out of train windows, quite pleased about the adventure, at parents standing on a platform holding their faces still. The route ran north through Germany, across the whole width of the Reich to the Dutch coast, then a boat across the North Sea, then a train into London and Liverpool Street Station. And there, on a platform in London, strangers waited holding pieces of card with the children's names written on them. That was the moment the arrangement was completed. A family stepped forward, read a name, took a child by the hand, and walked out into a country the child had never seen. The largest transport of all left Prague on the 1st of July, 1939. It carried 241 children. Remember that date, the 1st of July. We are going to come back to it at the end of this story, and when we do, I think it will stay with you. The 8th and final train pulled out on the 2nd of August, 1939. 669 children had made it out, and a 9th train was already scheduled. The 9th train was due to leave Prague on the 1st of September, 1939. There were 250 children on the list. Their names were written down. Their foster families in Britain were waiting. Their cases were packed. Their parents brought them to the station that morning. On that same morning, Germany invaded Poland. The borders closed. Every one of them. The train never moved. The children were taken back off the platform, back through the streets of Prague, back into a city that was closing around them. Almost none of them were ever seen again. Of everything that happened in those 9 months, this was the thing Nicholas Winton spoke about most in his later years. Not the 669, the 250, the train he could not get out. Then the war swallowed everything. He joined the Royal Air Force and served as a flight lieutenant. When the fighting ended, he worked in relief efforts across a broken continent. In 1948, he married a Danish woman named Grete. They settled in Maidenhead, a quiet town on the Thames west of London. They had 3 children. He worked. He joined local charities. He became, by every outward measure, an unremarkable Englishman with an unremarkable life. And the scrapbook went into a case, and the case went up into the attic, and the attic door was closed. He did not tell his wife. He did not tell his children. The children themselves had no idea who he was. Most had never been told a name. They simply grew up British, went to school, married, had children of their own, and carried a vague memory of a train. Which brings us to the question this whole story has been building towards. Why would a man do that and then never say a word? It was Greta who broke the silence in 1988 on the floor of that attic. She did not put the scrapbook back. She showed it to people who understood what they were looking at, and eventually it reached the BBC. In February of 1988, a program called That's Life invited Nicholas Winton to sit in the studio audience. He was 78. He came in a suit and tie and sat down like a man attending someone else's evening. At a certain point, the presenter, Esther Ranson, held up his scrapbook and began to explain what was inside it. Then she turned to the woman sitting directly beside him, a woman named Vera Gissing, and told her something she had not known for 49 years. The man in the next seat was the reason she was alive. Vera Gissing turned and took his hand and said thank you. And Nicholas Winton, who had never mentioned any of this to anyone, sat very still and lifted a finger behind his glasses to wipe his eyes. Then came the second broadcast, the one people still watch today. The producers had found more of them, dozens. They filled the studio and nobody told Winton who was sitting behind him. And Esther Ranson asked the room a question. Is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, please stand. There is a moment of silence, and then the whole row behind him rises to its feet. Then the row behind that. He turns around slowly, one way, and then the other. An elderly man in a jacket and tie, looking at a room full of grown adults who are all on their feet because of a decision he made in a hotel room in Prague when he was 29 years old. He does not say anything. He simply looks at them. And now the answer to our question. Why did he never mention it? Because, in his own words, he never thought it was remarkable. It only became remarkable later when people started calling him a hero, and he refused that word for the rest of his life. He said he had never been in any danger. The danger, he said, belonged to the people who stayed behind in Prague. He was knighted in 2003. At 105, he received the highest honor the Czech Republic can give, and remarked gently that he had perhaps lived long enough for everyone to start exaggerating. Nicholas Winton died on the 1st of July, 2015. He was 106 years old, the 1st of July. 76 years to the day since the train carrying 241 children pulled out of Prague. There is a statue on that platform now, a man with a child in his arms, and those 669 children grew up and had children, and their children had children. There are thousands of people walking around the world today who exist because a young man canceled a skiing holiday. He never told any of them. He put it in a case. He put the case in the attic. And he went and lived his life. If stories like this one mean something to you, you can join us as a keeper of the light. You'll find the join button right below this video. However you choose to support us, thank you for being here with us. Stay with us. Help us keep his light alive.